wavelength that our bodies work upon is 0 to 100 hertz, ELF energy. Over and over and over, I have detected the presence of, it appears clearly artificial. There's no explanation I can come for it in a natural sense at all. This is stepped intervals of 4 hertz, artificial energy at the ELF level. These are the waves that our bodies work at, our brains work at, our minds work at. So everything to me says that a grand design behind this project is to, and has been, to create a altered atmosphere that is now usable for the transmission, let's say enhanced transmission and propagation of electromagnetic energy, a component of which includes ELF energy. ELF energy can be used to store, if you pump it like a Tesla would deal with this resonance factor. If you pulse ELF energy, you can store tremendous amounts of energy at the level of a geophysical weapon. There's something called a heave weapon. If you read that HAARP report, there's something called a heave weapon. A heave weapon is where you actually lift up the magnetic field of the Earth, and it is equivalent in energy as well as apparently effects to the types of things you would see with an atomic bomb, with the advantage that you don't actually detonate anything. I mean, it's really pretty astounding.
So it's an invisible weapon where you can basically kill all the life in an entire region if you wish.
Yes, this is not something I'm making up. This is something I study. That's what my work is.
No, I understand. I've seen those federal documents. And going back to tectonic weapons that you mentioned earlier, we have Secretary of Defense Cohen back in '97 giving a speech about tectonic earthquake, type of volcanic type weapons, and then expanding on that to just show the craziness of people running things. They've used tens of thousands of tons of depleted uranium all over the world, knowing that the radiation detectors are picking up higher levels and that the particulates are very bad for all of us. We know they tested hundreds. Our own government did a high-altitude test, nuclear weapons back in the 60s. So we know that they do things that are very bad for the environment on a routine basis. Publicly, I've read that these different salts, these different chemicals that are in the air are also very bad for human tissues.
In numerous ways. I mean, you can just take it on a physical level first, just the mechanical side. There's a direct link between increased mortality and increased particulate count. You can get this from the, American Lung Association, whatever. This is all over the place. Johns Hopkins. If you breathe more particles, more of you will die. That's just the mechanics of it. Then you have to raise the question of, well, what exactly are these particles? What are they composed of, and what might they carry? Well, certainly if the compounds are soluble barium compounds, those guys are toxic, highly toxic. And then if you extend this on to the piggyback or transport mechanism, which is also exemplified in HAARP, then you open up another hole.
What's the main way of distribution? I mean, in a lot of times it's these unmarked white airplanes that have been photographed at weird U.S. bases out in Arizona and Indiana and all over the country. We know that's going on, but sometimes it's the passenger jets. Is this being mixed with fuel, or what's the main delivery mode for this?
Yeah, these are good questions. I once did a talk up there in Taos, New Mexico, and I started right out the beginning, and I said, folks, sorry. But the main questions you want, the 5 W's, who, what, when, where, why, whatever, you're not going to get a simple, direct answer. We don't have it, unfortunately. You're dealing with observations that have to be taken by citizens on the ground because there is no forthcoming information on this whatsoever. Now, that being said, I will say this. There are many individuals that have stated that these planes are a certain type of plane, say a military tanker, this type of thing. There are people that have said commercial aircraft, it's a joke to think that they are even remotely involved in this. What I do is I just collect the data, and if you look at my early work, the early work for the first year or two was nothing more than collecting photographs, almost entirely. I focused on getting images, and I would post these images, the best that I could get with telescopic images, telephoto images, and post them and ask the question, what type of plane is this? What are we dealing with? And all I will say, if you look at the photographs that I have taken, some of them which are truly remarkable in that they clearly show emissions from the entire wingspan. I have 5 of these, very good examples. They show emissions across the entire wingspan, a continuous stream. It doesn't come from the engines in that case. I'm not saying in all cases at all, but I do believe there have been different methods that have been used and experimented upon or tried. But in that case, it doesn't even come from the engines. If you look at those aircraft and you identify them, all I can say is they are commercial-type aircraft in those that I have programmed. I'm not saying they're commercial aircraft because I can't see. I can't see the people. I can't see the markings with my equipment.
Mr. Carnicom, what about this?
Commercial-type equipment.
Sure.
And I will clearly say that the evidence actually strongly, more than strongly, implicates the involvement and collusion and incorporation of the commercial airline industry within this operation.
Let me add something here. I have seen one jet flying at the same altitude just a few miles away here in Austin, not leaving trails that stay there for an hour or two, or leaving no trail at all, and right next to it a jet leaving a trail that's there 3 hours later. Now, what does that say?
Yeah, the classic arguments against these, and I'm familiar with most of them, but people will say, the planes are operating two different altitudes and the atmospheric conditions are different. Sorry, folks, it just doesn't hold. Anybody that digs into this seriously will see that, the conditions that you're describing there are not at variance enough to describe the tremendous difference in what Alex is speaking of right now.
Well, I know what happened. I mean, in the late 90s, contrails went from lasting 30 seconds on average, maybe a minute and a half, to being there for hours. Now, I want to know, could this be some type of resonant energy in the atmosphere that just makes normal condensation trails behave differently?
No, what happens, to the best of my knowledge, Alex, is this, in terms of the physics of what's going on. When you ask the question, how could you have I can't call them clouds because they're not really clouds anymore, but let's use that term for right now. Let's say you have a bank or layer at 35 to 40,000 feet. The region that was traditionally home to thin, high cirrus clouds, wispy clouds, and they would subsequently develop into fuller cloud forms that would descend to lower altitudes. But the high altitudes, 35,000 feet, were reserved primarily for thin, wispy clouds, and not a whole lot more. You have to ask the question, how at 35 to 40,000 feet could you have a continuous thick layer start to develop? And it is with the introduction of the salt, a certain type of salt, not just any salt. But if you introduced a salt that can absorb moisture when the humidity is roughly 35%, which there are certain salts that do that, the type that I'm speaking of, now you change things because now you're able to collect and absorb moisture on extremely small particles. And let's talk about clouds for a second because let's talk about a difference between two things. Contrails, if you look at what a contrail is, contrails form, it's, what happens when you breathe on a cold winter day, right?
Stay there. We'll have to talk about it when we get back. This is such an important subject because things have changed in our atmosphere. There have been atmospheric changes to the planet. The laws that we knew before, it seems, have been suspended. And I've seen these trails down low. We'll be right back.